Am I good to go, Cecilia?
Yes.
Cool. So, hello everyone. It's bună dimineața for me, but I wanted to welcome you all to this very exciting panel. And I know that I hope you all get the chance to watch these films. If you've watched them all, I applaud you. It's about 6 hours, I realized, these 3 films together. And very intense emotionally, a lot of information as well. So I hope you do get to watch them before the end of the festival on the 21st. And thank you all for coming. So I wanted to first start off by introducing our guests a little bit and maybe talking about the films, since I know some of us are in Europe and might not have access to the festival. I hope that you still are able to watch these films some way. But today we have with me Oana Giurgiu, who is the director of Occasional Spies. So that's very exciting. And we also, who is a law and journalism graduate and has directed several television documentaries before working in film. And we also have Adrian Cioflanca, who is the co-director with Radu Jude of the documentary Exit of the Trains and Țara Moartă, Dead Nation. He's a historian director and the director of the Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania. And we also are joined by Cristina Bejan, who is an award-winning Romanian-American historian, theater artist, and poet. She also used to work at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. So that's very brief. Obviously, there's a lot more I could say about our very distinguished guests. And yeah, I think today I kind of wanted to touch on, obviously all these films have different subjects. So Occasional Spies, for those who are not aware, is a little bit more about the Jewish resistance, particularly in Romania, but also throughout Eastern Europe, in the former Yugoslavia, Slovakia, and Hungary as well. And Țara Moartă is Dead Nation, is a film about kind of the right-wing legionnaires, as well as the reality, Jewish reality during the Second World War. And then The Exit of the Trains, which is the second kind of film that complements Dead Nation, is about the Iași pogrom, which happened in 1941. I think the 90th anniversary of the pogrom just passed this summer. So it was a very timely film debut. And I kind of just want to talk a little bit about, well, as Mihaela was saying before we started, that kind of this subject matter in Romanian film is unprecedented. And it's a very new kind of frontier in Romanian filmmaking. And I'm very excited to get more into how these films were made and some of the choices. So I wanted to start a little bit actually with Oana more specifically, because I noticed in the beginning of the film that the National Romanian Television was one of the producers of the film. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that and kind of how much say they kind of had in the film, if any, and what that process was like of working with Romanian National Television on this kind of subject that hasn't really been a mainstream subject in Romanian film before.
Well, it will be a little bit disappointing, but this is the way of financing films in Romania. So basically my film is financed by the Romanian Film Center. So this means only let's say cinema funds. And the Romanian television is one of the potential financiers of films in Romania. So basically this is like a pre-sale. They have the right to show the film and so on. So this happened also with my previous film. They were pre-selling it, pre-buying it, and pre-buying it, and showed it later on. Yeah. So
they did show it on the national Romanian TV eventually.
yeah, the film is brand new. So basically right now we are still in the process of showing it in festivals. It premiered this summer actually in film festivals in Romania and in Hungary. So I don't have such a feedback except of, I mean, from abroad, other than the one in Hungary and the little feedback I got from US now. So it's quite fresh. I'm not really able to give a feedback on the audience.
Yeah, and I know that Adrian, this Sarah Morta is a little bit older, and I know that Exit of the Trains is still very new. But I was wondering about feedback and kind of the criticism in Romania and outside, and if you notice any differences in terms of how the films are received.
Yeah, we were lucky. We got the beginning of the pandemic during the Berlin Festival. The Exit of the Trains was selected for the Berlin Festival, and it was screened there with public in person. So we had also the occasion to present it to screen it in Romania. So we have a little bit of feedback. The reception is pretty qualified, because I was afraid that this classic idea of a documentary, BBC style or Discovery style documentary, will influence the reception of this very experimental new format of the film. But no, actually, for people educated with the new wave of making films, of reinventing formats for all this large category, actually it is a large one, of the audience. We had the occasion to have very good discussions on the film. So I was afraid, but with little ground in the end.
No, that's very interesting, and I think I was wondering actually, because there is still a Jewish community in Romania, and obviously there's a much bigger diaspora of Romanian Jews. I was wondering, how, if in any way the community was involved, or was there like special previews for the community? And if so, I was really interested to hear their kind of feelings about the films.
Now we are in the same phase of festivals, but the community was involved by its resources, because most of the material, documentary material I used in the film is based in the archive of our center, the Center for the Study of Jewish History, which is a small research institute, but also the holder of the historical archives of the Jewish communities in Romania. And we benefited from the perspective of the victims, because most of the approaches on the Holocaust in Romania focuses on the responsibilities of the Antonescu regime, of the perpetrators, but we changed this perspective on letting the victims speak.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting, and kind of similarly, Oana, I think you can also speak a little bit to this as well, because the movie was really focused on, I felt, the kind of the stories of the partisans and their own background as well. So I also was curious about this issue of narrative, and I think also in the museum space and the academic space, there's kind of been this one narrative of, especially with the Romanian Holocaust for a very long time, this one dominant narrative, not based in kind of more on the victim, not really looking at the victim's testimonies and more looking at, like you said, the kind of history of the war and not really looking at the Holocaust that deeply. So I was wondering if I think any of you could kind of think about this kind of shift in narrative through film and kind of how that's progressing and how you see that kind of continuing.
From my film, you said it very well that it's more a film about the resistance than I would say about the Holocaust. Is just touching this this narrative, of course, because it's right. It's placed in 44, so it's basically the moment of the Hungarian events in that period. So from that perspective, yes, it's about the Holocaust in Transylvania. And but again, this is more a film about the resistance, and it's more a film about the history of these countries that in a strange, it's not a strange way, but this is the way we are studying history, like very locally, very regional, very national. And basically the events are so interdependent, so they are just a consequence of another country's act or event. So basically the whole film is putting together the history of Eastern Europe, meaning, as you said, Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, as well as the Middle East, Israel, Palestine and Cairo as a main ground from where everything was going on in this part of Europe. For my film, I was gathering information. I was not getting necessarily the help of the community in Romania, but for sure, the Romanian community in Israel helped me very much, getting all this information and getting to the descendants of my characters. But it was a very strange journey that I had for this film. I didn't really want to do it, but just things were popping in. And I remember that, for instance, I got information also from a library somewhere in Quebec, I guess. I gathered information from all over the world for this film. And it was really amazing how it happened. And yeah, I just put everything together, but it took me like 5 years to manage to do it. And also I got some help from Adrian, like also from my previous film. So it's like a joint venture with a lot of people involved.
Yeah, I saw that you were one of the voices in the exit of the trains, or did I read that wrong? That you did read one of the testimonies.
Yeah, I did. I almost forgot I did it, but yes, I did, yeah.
But I think, it's really interesting how all of these films really look at something really underrepresented, I think, in Romania. This story of occasional spies, I didn't know about at all until I watched the film. And, I think having this really personal look at the Iași pogrom is very unique as well, because it's very hard. And Adrian, I think I would like your thoughts on this as well, but kind of really understanding the scale of these events is something that is always a challenge, especially in Jewish history and kind of the history of the Holocaust. And I was kind of curious as to, I think a lot of times Holocaust film and also Holocaust media in general, museums, it's really often talked about in a pedagogical way to teach and to spread information. But I was wondering what you think of them as in an emotional way, and what consideration, did you have of kind of the emotions of the audience experiencing, these really intense testimonies and very intense images, graphic images often, which are important and we should look at, but how do you I always struggle with, like, how do you not kind of psych people out to the point where they're not absorbing anymore because it's so impactful. So I was wondering about your consideration with that. And also, Christina, if you can talk a little bit about that as well with the US Historical Holocaust Museum, because I know the issue of using graphic images, testimony and kind of balancing that with the experience of the viewer, the visitor, is something that's talked a lot about. So I'd like your thoughts on that.
Christina, you start, please.
Well, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Libby. I also want to thank Otilia and Mihaela for making this festival possible, which it's so important, not just for the Romanian diaspora, but for global cinema here in the United States, and for inviting me to speak. And I also want to congratulate Oana and Adrian on their amazing filmmaking. I have to say, Oana's story was new to me as well. Just like Libby said, it was new to her. And I think it's a story of Jewish resilience and heroism during World War II and actually during the period of the Holocaust. I have to share a really cool Denver connection. Gilda Meir, the first female prime minister of Israel and one of them in the world, she studied here in Denver for high school. So Denver, Colorado claims her. But I also want to say I'm super proud of Adrian, who's been a long-term friend of mine. And when he became a film director and famous, I was bragging about him all over the place. So with that, I will answer your question, Libby. My work at the museum was not an exhibition. I am not a public historian. I was in the archives and as a researcher, and I was writing articles for the 5-volume Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos. So we did use graphic images in the encyclopedia, and my personal opinion is that we shouldn't censor history, that we should absolutely be exposed to everything. And I think this drive to censor history is what is really leading to just first Holocaust, the removal of Holocaust education in American schools and universities. And then what results from that is ignorance and Holocaust denial. So I think we need all the information at our fingertips, and as educators and students and lifelong learners. And I think these films are so important because giving the microphone to the victims and actually the survivors in many cases, that was the most moving part for me working at the Holocaust Museum, was working in the archives, the oral history archives, and listening to survivors' testimonies. And so seeing these historical events through their eyes, that's how we connect with the humanity of this history and the victims. That's what presses us to prevent these things happening again, because we have that personal human connection. And it's also what leads to empathy. What divides people, they're made up differences. There's actually nothing that divides us at all. We have the exact same DNA across the entire globe. So to develop empathy and put ourselves in other people's shoes, I believe will prevent such atrocities happening in the future. So I think these films are incredibly important because of that. So Adrian?
I started to show photos of the Iași pogrom at my students like 10 years ago, I suppose. And I was warned about the possible effects through theoretical literature, Susan Sontag and others, who warned that the impact could be traumatic, that there is it can be a dimension of obscenity for these photos, and a sort of strange voyeurism whenever you take a look on photos of the Holocaust. I saw the impact of the photos on my students at that time. I saw people crying during the courses. So I was trained to be cautious, but on the other hand, I agree with Christina that we don't have to censor those images, because we have the right to interpret them. Even if the photos are taken by perpetrators, they cannot impose us the way we perceive the photos. But in our film, which focuses on other type of photos, civilian photos, portraits of the victims, it was our trial to reverse the status of the looking, because it's not shameful, it's not obscene, it's not voyeuristic to take a look on those photos and to be patient to listen that story. It needs courage and it needs patience to look at this type of this type of film. And this is why we decided to choose this solution for our film, which is the equivalent what, let's say, Clifford Geertz calls thick description. Because the main challenge when you make a movie about the Holocaust is to address the idea of unimaginable, how to describe technically this unrepresentable experience of the Holocaust. And you can choose a narrator or an expert to witness to tell the story for you in a documentary. You can choose the solution of reenacting. But in our case, we chose this thick description by accumulating voices. It's a density of descriptors of the event. Many voices describing the same event. Most of the story looks similar, but what is important here, it is the details of the story and the small differences who matter disproportionately in a terrible context, in the terrible context of the Holocaust.
Yeah, and I thought it was really, Adriana, I was reading one of your articles where you said, our history has been written with too many letters and too few images. And I feel like all these films really kind of address that, and especially Oana, kind of your use of photos and not video, I thought was really interesting, kind of the reenactment, but not through actual dialogue, I guess, and more so with photos. And I noticed actually in both films, and it really stuck out to me, was the use of silence. Because in the second part of The Exit of the Trains, it's completely silent. And there's a testimony with no images at all before the second part. And also in Occasional Spies, this kind of use of the shutter click to pause and kind of separate the moments. So I was kind of, I mean, I know a lot of these films have to do with images, but I found the sound very interesting as well. So I was wondering if you could talk about that choice to kind of incorporate silence in the films.
I just want to get back a little bit to the first question, to the previous question, because I think it's important. I just want to say that I was doing the film I did the way I did it, just because I knew that if I touch a subject, it will be hard for another filmmaker to touch it again. So it's like a duty to tell a complete story, even if it might be here and then a little bit hard to be followed because it's just so dense and so didactic, as you say. But you know, I have another opinion also on the way the film is developing these days, and the fact that we are now more watching films on VOD platforms. So basically we can stop the viewing at a point and just recoup a little bit, and we can get fast forward, or we can rewind. So sometimes these kind of films, I mean, this is the future. These kind of films are like a book that you can revisit if you really want to get the information. And on the other hand, I think making these kind of films for a new generation that is more used with a multimedia kind of resources, I think it's important. So basically, from my perspective, I prefer not to be as much of an author, and I wanted to be to leave something more coherent for a future researcher or whatever. But in the same time, of course, you have to deliver something, as you mentioned, like an entertainment. But it's not, I wouldn't call it entertainment as much as I would call it like to give the viewer, to drag the viewer inside the film and try to drag him in a way to be empathic to the events and to what the storyteller is saying, you know. And from my perspective in the film, I just wanted to give the to show the let's say the humanity of the characters, the fact that they were just I mean they were simple human beings that were just that happened to be in the middle of those awful events, or sometimes tragic, sometimes funny, sometimes it's like life. And I always did that in my films, that I really wanted to show the characters as they were. And I'm very happy that I managed to found the actors that managed to reenact the stories that happened those days. And yes, just to answer the question on the chat, they were the most important, I mean, from their memories, I just took some excerpts that from my perspective were really showing their human part, and also the tragic situation of those days.
I think it's so interesting what you said about streaming as well, because I think especially with these subjects that are really difficult, and the films are really, it's really a lot of heavy information and heavy testimonial. I think, you know, that is a question of, does streaming kind of impede in a way, because you can, it's not like you're sitting in a theater, you can't just get up and leave, you kind of have to sit through it. It's a very different experience than just sitting in a theater. Like I was thinking about, you know, Claude Lanzmann, obviously, in Shoah, which is like the kind of, everyone comes back to that film. It's a 9-hour movie. And so how does, you know, having the streaming for these kinds of things, is it a concern? Because I always think, you know, people get very easily distracted if they're just watching on the computer. Or I think you kind of pointed on, I thought it was really interesting that, you know, you kind of adapted the film a little bit to this kind of streaming. And Adrian, I wonder if you could talk about that as well. And also the question about silence, because I would really like to talk about that too.
Well, we choose silence because of the density of details. This is an obvious solution, but as Oana said, you can, in the way we consume films today, we can choose our way of perceiving the film and watching the film. In the because I see a question about portraits of the victims. I was shocked by the fact that even in professional archives like Yad Vashem or United States Holocaust Memorial Museums, they collected photos of victims of the Yash pogrom, but in few cases there were stories attached to those portraits. So you can find on the websites of the two main archives in the world many portraits, but with very few details about the destiny, about the biographies of those in the photos, and about how they died. And this is part of our work in the Exit of the Trains. Because using a huge database with hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, which I searched electronically, and I organized them in, indexed them and organized them in databases, I was able to find stories for 200 persons from portraits from the Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and this album, which I bought from eBay with 100 euros or something like that, which also contains 300 portraits of victims, but and names, but no stories. And this is what is included in the film. It's original research. You cannot find that information in books or articles in most cases. And what is troubling is that sometimes even the families of the victims don't know the story of their fathers, because in most cases during the Iași pogrom, adult male were killed. They targeted the men. Only 40 women were killed out of more than 10,000 victims. I collected 600 portraits. This is what is available in the entire world for the moment when we speak about photos of the victims of the Iași pogrom out of more than 10,000. And I was able to find out the story of only 200 victims, and all of them were included in the film. This is why it is so long, but at the same time, keep in mind that there are only 200 stories included, and sometimes it is only one phrase related to a person.
Right, and I think this is something that, you know, we're talking about silence, and I also was thinking about healing. How do we heal? You know, I think in a lot of ways, there's still a lot of, obviously there's still grieving for the community. And I actually found that it is very healing, I think, to kind of have this, because it's so hard when you have family who died in a camp to know when they died, how they died, because all this information was either deliberately destroyed, or it's just so many people died that it's impossible to know what happened to everyone. Something that I was thinking of, and you know, I think it's good for the audience to know, because everyone has a different amount of familiarity with the situation in Romania specifically. And Adrian, I know you've talked about this a lot, that the archives are not very organized in terms of this material, but they were also for a very long time not available. And even pulling up one of these images could get you arrested. It could get you in very serious situation in Romania to kind of talk about these events, to go into the archives, to even find this stuff could put you in a very dangerous situation. And, you know, the fact is there's 200 in the film, and I think there's the upwards estimate is around 13,000 people were killed in the pogrom. So even that kind of disparity, and just talking about archives and maybe showing this in a film, how that's different from a book, let's say, and how kind of illuminating archives. I know you all used archival, both of you used archival footage. I know Oana was more using film archives from the time, but maybe talking a little bit more, and Christina, you know, working in the archives with this material, obviously very different in the States, I think, than in Romania, but maybe just how, I don't know if I see it as corrective history. It is the history. It's just a matter of, it hasn't been included in our history. So maybe talking a little bit more about the situation with archives for people who are not super familiar, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm writing right now an article about the photos of atrocities. And I went back to the 19th century, and I discovered that this is a longer story than I thought, because people were afraid of photos of atrocities. Even in the 19th century, the authorities tried to control the circulation of photos or of gravures representing pogroms against people, Jews in Romania. They wanted to, they denied all the time the veridicity of the representations of violence. And this fear remained valid to the Holocaust and afterwards. During the Holocaust, the authorities tried to catch as many, to control the circulation of photos. To take photos was prohibited in Romania at that time, but what they couldn't control was the activity of German soldiers, and most of the photos were taken by Germans. Some of them were bought by members of the Jewish community. Some of them were found in Germany during the war or after the war. Many photos.
Did Adrian freeze for everyone, or am I frozen?
Yeah, I guess it froze for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I can contribute to the archives conversation. I first want to share that, Oana, I was really moved by your response about viewing your film as a contribution to research and education, because for future, not just scholars, but just future citizens of the world. Because that was my feeling watching all of these, is that these are like PhD theses, in terms of contributions to knowledge, and a great place if you want to dig deeper to start on these subjects. And a word I thought, Libby, instead of entertainment, is engagement. Something can be interesting of all art forms, but not necessarily entertaining. And people have different definitions of what's entertaining for them. So I think engagement is a good word, and also storytelling, which is something Oana had used the word storyteller. So regarding the archives, I hope that Adrian comes back, because he has experience in both the Washington, D.C. U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum archive and all the archives in Romania. He knows the Romanian archives a lot better than I do, even though I do have archival experience in Romania, but not on the Holocaust. And when it comes to the archives, I think I'm just going to say a word about what it means to do archival research, because how would you know unless you've done it, right? It is very tedious, and it can be digital, where you're looking at digital documents and photos, or it can be actual, letters and documents from that time. And it is tedious, and you have to go through, thousands and thousands of documents, and you have no idea what you're going to find. So doing archival research is a process of discovery, for sure. It is true that the Holocaust Museum archive is more professional in terms of its operation than Romanian archives, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily any easier, because archival research, like I said, is tedious, and you have no idea what you're going to find, so it's difficult no matter where you're doing it. So stop there.
I would just like to add, for instance, for my film, I was I was researching it for, both, let's say, private or national archives, but for instance, I was looking in the Zionist archive in Jerusalem, and it was so funny because everything was, of course, in Hebrew, and I was with a friend, and he said, we are two stupid, guys who think that we'll find something here, but you don't know Hebrew, I don't know computer, I don't know how we are going to manage today when we went there. But sometimes it's, not sometimes, a lot of times when you are researching, it's about luck. And just trust the luck, because it will happen it will come to you. It will happen at a point, and that day, for instance, for us was pure luck, and probably Romanian pure intuition. We just followed some numbers, and we managed to get the files for each and every character that I was never imagining that I'm going to get that. And it was very, very complicated, for instance, for me, because all these spies that I was looking at, all these people that I was looking for, they had so many names, so many code names, so many names given by the British intelligence. Then there were the Romanian names, then there were names they got in Palestine. So it was really a mess. And I was trying to track them and to try to see where they are from and so on. But it was really an amazing, as I said, journey that I had. And yeah, I was looking, for instance, in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, but I got nothing. So I got far more somewhere where you wouldn't expect, like for instance, in the Slovak film archive, because what we were also researching were the film archives that are actually quite accessible for any person, as long as you don't use it in a film. Basically, you can see a lot of things over there if you are researching. What I learned from this experience is that you don't have to limit yourself. Just imagine that you can find things all over, and people will be really helpful.
Yeah, and the story, I mean, I think I was like, this, someone couldn't even make this up. This is like too unbelievable to even be made up. I don't even know how, because the story itself is so, and the ending and everything, it was just like, I can't believe this really happened. And I think it's even beyond imagination what happened and how it happened. And I was really, and you were speaking earlier about how you spoke with descendants. I remember you start the film with a descendant of one of the people. And I was wondering, I'm guessing that you had many more interviews than that, just that one, and how that kind of informed your process as well, and also their reaction to the film. I'd love to know that.
In films, especially in documentaries, but it's happening also in fiction films, we are saying that we are killing our babies when we cut from the film and we throw away parts of it, which was actually where you invested money and time and energy and so on, but you have to cut it because it doesn't work. And when I started to make this film, I was not intending to make a film reenacted, or especially because I'm not a film director, like a fiction film director, and I don't know how to work with actors. I just wanted to make interviews with the descendants of my characters, of these spies, and also implied some experts, some historians. But in the end, I realized that after interviewing all these people, I realized that my spies were really spies because they were not sharing the information with their children. So basically, the children were totally innocent, and they knew nothing but nothing. And I got nothing from them, and I was pretty depressed for a while because I didn't know how to follow my film and how to manage to do it, because the stories there and their memories and what I found about them were so interesting. And I realized that I can also, let's say, put the history back together because many of them were unknown by the society and also by historians. So I think that we somehow owe them to be known. And I didn't know what to do. And in the end, this idea came to make photos and to make basically reenacted photos, because when my spies were living into their journey, they were making a lot of photos, like personal ones. I mean, for them was not clear what a spy means, probably because they were just taking photos of themselves. And this was funny. It was clear that they were so innocent that they didn't know that they have to keep their identity as much as, to be as unknown as possible. But they were making all these photos everywhere. And this is how I got the idea of making the film this way. That's
amazing. And I just wanted to open the floor. I mean, Maria Stan had a question that I hope it's okay if I read it, about looking at the images of people passing by cadavers on the streets of Iași and the train passengers looking down at corpses at the station. And it made me reflect once again upon the role of bystanders in all tragedies. Am I one of them? Should I speak up sooner rather than later or never? So I was wondering, I guess, asking about bystanders, which is always a question when we talk about the Holocaust. It comes up a lot. And your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I had some problems with my with the signal. Just one little thing about the discussion with Oana. She came to CNSAS to ask about the documents we have in our archive in the National Council for the Study of the Securitate Archives. And at that time, I know something close to nothing about the subject. So I was not able to help, but I was challenged by her questions, and I started to dig, and I realized that actually there are thousands of pages of documents in our archive about this subject, which are of course very difficult to read. They are part of a judicial inquiry, but of course it is material for books and for developing the subject in a way or another. But this tells a lot about the state of the archives in Romania, which were disorganized, especially by the communist authorities. They were organized as repressive archives. The original documents and original photos were taken out of the archives and put in files to conduct repressive actions against individuals, part of the post-war trials against war criminals in some cases, a few cases, but in most cases to conduct repressive actions against those considered enemies by the communist regime. And it is very difficult to track these documents because what we got from the secret services from Romania were only indexes of names. And I've been working in the CNSAS archive in the last 9 years, and still it is very difficult even for myself to track documents. So only in the last few months, I could find more about what Oana asked like 2 years ago, I suppose, 2 or 3 years ago. And in the case of bystanders, yes, these mass killings during 1941 perpetrated in Romania and also in Bessarabia, Bukovina, Transnistria were very visible. All the Holocaust by bullets was visible. I know right now that many episodes of the Holocaust were recorded, were filmed by the Romanian army. We still don't know where the footage is, but we have a footage of the Bucharest pogrom and rebellion in January 1941. And in the footage, we can see hundreds, maybe thousands of people on the streets seeing the events. And we have only 10 memoirs written by witnesses of those events which remained in archive. This discrepancy speaks a lot about censorship and repression during the communist regime. People were afraid of telling this story, but still we have so many witnesses, so many bystanders, and only a few stories. And this speaks about responsibility and all the ethical problems raised by attending an event like that.
Yeah, it sounds like for another film. So another film on the way about that.
I just want to give you an example about archive and what's happening in Romania, and most likely it can happen also in many other countries from the East. For instance, there is a fund, I mean, this is how they call it, yeah, like a pile of reels that exists in the Romanian film archive, that it's secret, because it was inherited a secret after the communism. So basically it was secret during the communism, it's still secret today. And this fund, it's all about the basically the alliance between Romania and Germany during the war. So Adrian, maybe over there might be something, but guess what? It's secret. So nobody saw it, and you cannot see it until it will not be secret anymore, because it's already there are so many, like 80 years after. So yeah, there are many strange things that were happening. But for instance, what I was finding in the Slovak archives in my film, and I was so happy, but it was just me and the editor that we were so happy, because we found the footage with my characters in the Slovak archive. Nobody knew about it. And still, I mean, probably the ones that saw the film are the ones that saw this for the first time. I mean, not even the children of these people, they don't know that they appear so little in that footage, that Slovak footage. Yeah, so this is, but I guess that on the other hand, this is the good thing about archives, that sometimes they are so well hidden, then we can make films and make research even after so many years. So I wouldn't say it's bad 100%.
Yeah, so Mihaela asked a really great question, and I think it's a good question to kind of round out the discussion. So what can we do to exercise collective responsibility for reparation and prevention?
Well, I will tackle that. 2 days ago, the news from Romania was that the Senate passed a requirement for high schools that there has to be a unit on Romanian Holocaust education, at least covering what happened. This is a huge step. I'm sure Oana and Adrian know more about this than I do. But I can say that it was only through my doctoral research that my own father found out the Holocaust happened in Romania, because he was raised during communism and it was erased from the history books. So my answer to that is education, tackling the hard stuff. The more we know, right, the more powerful we are. Education is the most powerful tool to change the world. That was Nelson Mandela, and I believe that. So educating in our schools, but in our families and ourselves, we're lifelong learners, right? So that is my plea for us all.
This is Giorgio. Sorry, I joined later. I just want to say something to it. I had a private exchange with Otilia before. So I think my grandmother was in the Holocaust too. They never talked to families. So it was almost like the code of silence. You couldn't ask. And I remember all her friends had the number of their hand. But I asked, what is that? They never gave you details. So it was something silent in the families about this. But about Romania, I think at now, if you follow the press, and not only the press, there are these current to make a resemblance between the situation of the Jews and the COVID vaccination, which is horrible. I mean, I got into discussions with dear friends who are not, they are educated people. So this one, I think also education is so important. The third thing which I would like, and I told Otilia this, I saw the movie I Do Not Care If We Go Down on History as Barbarians. It's the most courageous movie, in my opinion, created by anybody. And it was totally negatively perceived in Romania. It's considered an anti-patriotic movie, which is absolutely, Radu Jude, in my opinion, it is the most courageous artist of Romania, even if he's a pretty odd person. He is amazing to come out with this, which is every politician in Romania, almost everybody will never talk positive about this movie. It is, so I would suggest if you could create a debate with pros and cons about this movie, especially in the students. I think the students are only those who are ready for something like this. That would really help Romania. And of course, if with Otilia we discussed if Radu Jude would participate, I doubt, but it would be really interesting to see the pros and cons into that.
I'd also put Oana right there as well as one of the most.
No, Oana, yes, but Oana, we know,
So,
we know about the previous movie, which is I'm a big fan of that one too.
yeah. So if it's 10, so I do want to open to any other questions that I know there's a lot of things to ask. Marius, do you want to say your own question, or would you like me to read it?
I could ask you a brief question. Based on the discussion we just had, and thank you all, would it be possible, and do you think it's desirable, to make a movie about those in Romania who opposed the Holocaust? There must have been some, and I assume there is enough documentation in the archives about those. Even a few cases will do a lot in inspiring the current generation to oppose horrible things like this in the future.
Yeah, but this is indeed a marginal story, because only few resisted to the authorities, and there is a sort of reluctance from historians to approach this subject, because during the communist regime in the 80s and the 90s, when negationism was at its peak, there was this push from the government, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to focus on those who saved Jews. And this is, of course, a good subject. It is important educationally, but still we speak about around 60 persons who are righteous among nations. Of course, in reality, there were more than that. But still, it's rather, at the moment, a rather marginal moment. So those who avoid approaching this subject for the moment want to avoid the political use of this subject by the authorities.
Okay, well, I have one more question that I like this one too. One wonders how working, so she was asked, it's from Ana Moresan from Facebook. She was wondering how working on such research affected researchers personally.
Well, I just want to say to answer a little bit to the previous question, and we just found out a great story, for instance. But if this is going to happen, then it will be a fiction film, not a documentary. And it's a story of somebody who was sent to Transnistria as a child and was saved by a family. But I wouldn't say that there is no interest in this. I mean, if we will find some interesting story, then it will become probably a film. And the answer to your question will be yeah. I guess for me, working and living so much in the 40s, making these films, was really helping me and was putting I mean, for instance, I would tell you a prosaic story. Like when the pandemic started and we had to make all this to buy goods for a few months or stuff like that. I was so amused by the fact when I was making the film, I was making an exercise with a set designer, imagining if those people were going in the mountains, what would they take, with them. And I knew some things, that they took some flour, they took a whole pig, they took some cheese and so on. But then we made this exercise. Let's see what would they take in order to make props for the shooting. And it was so funny because I called her and I say, now, can you remember what we were saying that back then? Because maybe we need now. So sometimes it's really, I mean, sometimes film and life is overlapping, and it's also giving you, and I guess that somehow for me, all this period was, I went through it in another way, you know, remembering and knowing what my characters were doing, for instance. Sometimes you know what some people were suffering and this makes you stronger or tougher. I don't know. I guess that Adrian is tougher than me anyway. Because he was, I mean, he studied more the story.
Yeah, I think it's, and I actually want to take a minute just to thank you all personally, because as someone, you know, with a Romanian Jewish background, who's similar to what George was saying before, where people don't really talk about this, what happened so much, you know, doing this research on, you know, films and on the Holocaust in Romania in general, at least, I guess I'll answer the question too, for me has been really healing. And I think having these films and seeing that the people in Occasional Spies are like, they're honestly my age. So to watch the film and think, oh my God, like, what if I had to do that? Would I do that? You know, would I put my own life at risk to save, you know, someone? You know, for me, it's been very healing, even though they're really difficult. I think just seeing these things have a stage and a reception and be taken with such a seriousness. I think also coming from Romania, because, you know, in the US, I feel like we're so inundated with very Hollywood Holocaust films that are really spectacles in some ways that are kind of gross. And to be taken with a kind of seriousness, I think is really, I know it did affect me a lot, but I think I had a lot of rage for a long time, and I'm sure a lot of people with the same background maybe, and even in the testimony, I remember one of the widows said, you know, I don't want revenge. I just want these people who did this to be brought to justice. And we never really got that. So it's like, how do we move forward? For me, it's knowing more has always made me feel better and less angry, but I'll always be angry, but I think it's helped me develop past that stage of initial rage. So yeah, I hope that helps too for that question. Yeah, I'm just gonna
actually in the case of that specific widow, justice came because after her letter, the policeman who aggressed her husband was arrested and put in prison for almost 10 years. And there was a sort of a Romanian version of the Nuremberg trial. Hundreds of people were convicted for war crimes. And we know little about this, but this happened in late 40s and in the 50s.
Again, something that I think we should all learn more about. I know I read a little bit about it, but definitely something super interesting. I'm gonna just, if anyone else has a lingering question, I'll just leave this space a little bit, but thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to our audience for being so engaging and really having great questions and be here. It really means a lot to all of us. And thank you to ARCS and Northwest Film Forum and AAPJ and Archer for putting this all together. Really appreciate it. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Arizona Film Festival as well. Sorry.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. There's many of us, you know, putting together this festival this year. So I think we have you all in our hearts, and please follow our events and buy our films and support Romanian cinema. We have been doing wonderful things. We're the best cultural product we are exporting at this time. So please be proud and share and invite friends. And for us, allow us to bring this every year to make this happen. every year. Thank you. And thank you for
Thank you
your
so
work.
much. Yeah, this was amazing and so needed. I mean, it's like we need to know, we need to be aware and be activists. So important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was so good to see all of you. And
Congratulations, everyone.
thank you, Theo, for showing up. I'm just going to stop the recording, but we can stay.
Yes, I do have a